"Don't stop," she whispered, her voice trembling through the storm. The cowboy's hand lingered against her cheek, rough from years of dust and gunfire. His breath met hers in the dark, steady but burdened, as if the weight of every sin he'd carried was begging to break free. Rain slid down the cabin window like tears neither of them could shed. He'd come from the shadows of blood and regret. She'd just buried her husband beneath the same sky that once promised forever. Now, between them, silence burned hotter than the fire on the hearth. When she said it again softer, aching, afraid, he felt something in him yield. The West was no place for mercy, yet somehow mercy found them. And as thunder rolled beyond the hills, he whispered back, "You're safe now, ma'am, inside my cabin." The wind had teeth that night. It bit at the hem of Mary Cartwright's black dress as she knelt beside the open grave, the last light of day sinking behind a wall of gray. Her fingers, numb and trembling, pressed the final handful of earth onto the pinewood box that held her husband. The sound was soft, almost merciful, yet it echoed like thunder inside her chest. The preacher had gone hours ago. So had the neighbors, if you could still call them that. Out here, once death touched a place, people stayed away. The prairie was cruel that way. It remembered what it took. Mary stayed. She could not yet move. Her heart was heavy as the sky above her, and her breath came shallow, as if the storm had stolen even that. A horse snorted somewhere up the ridge. She turned her head, hand going to the shotgun lying in the wet grass beside her. The sound came again, hooves shifting, leather creaking, a man's quiet exhale. A shape stood against the fading light, tall, still, watching. Mary rose, spine straight despite the cold. "If you've come for the house, there's nothing left worth stealing," she called. Her voice cracked, but her eyes did not waver. The stranger stepped closer, his coat dark with rain. "Didn't come for that," he said. His tone carried no threat, just weariness, like someone who'd been speaking to ghosts for too long. He stopped at the edge of the grave. His hat dripped water, his boots sinking into the mud. "I was passing through," he said quietly. "Saw the smoke earlier. Figured someone might need a hand." Mary studied him through the dim. The man had a hard face, lined by sun and sin. A scar traced his jaw like a question mark. He looked too calm to be harmless. "I don't need help," she said. He nodded once. "Didn't reckon you did." He turned slightly, as though to leave, but his eyes lingered on the mound of earth before her. "Was he your man?" She swallowed, throat raw. He was. The stranger's jaw shifted. He looked down, hat low, rain dripping from its brim. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but something in the way he said them made her chest tighten. He spoke like a man who'd said sorry 100 times before, and meant none of them enough. The wind rose again, carrying the smell of gunpowder from far off. Mary's hand tightened on the shotgun. "You best get inside," he said after a moment. "Storm's not far behind." I said I don't need. A crack split the air, not thunder, gunfire, distant but sharp. The stranger's head snapped toward the sound. His hand moved under his coat with the ease of habit. "You live alone?" Mary hesitated. "Yes." "Then they'll come here next." He turned his horse toward the slope. "Outlaws, scavengers, they follow fresh graves. Figure there's easy loot. You stay, you die." She stared at him, torn between fear and disbelief. "And what are you, some kind of savior?" His gaze met hers, cold and unflinching. "No, ma'am. Just a man trying to outrun his own mistakes." Lightning cracked across the horizon, showing for an instant the hollows beneath his eyes, the blood stain on his sleeve, the emptiness of a man who'd lost something long ago. She looked down at the grave, then back to him. The wind had shifted east now, carrying the scent of rain and iron. "If I go," she said softly, "I can't come back." "Then don't." His voice was quiet, certain. Some places ain't meant for second chances. He reached out a hand, gloved and rough. "Come on, before the wolves get curious." Mary hesitated. The sky rumbled low. Somewhere, a coyote's cry tangled with the wind. Her husband's grave looked smaller now, swallowed by shadow. She took a step. Then another. Her fingers brushed his hand. Just for balance, she told herself. But the warmth of it startled her more than the cold ever had. He led her toward the ridge, guiding her horse with a steady hand. Behind them, the first drops of rain began to fall, darkening the soil, softening the mound where her husband slept. By the time they reached the ridge, night had swallowed the valley whole. The stranger didn't speak, and Mary didn't ask where they were going. The silence between them was too heavy to break. At the crest, she looked back once. The grave was gone from view, hidden by distance and rain. Her old life lay beneath that earth, everything she'd known, buried with the man she'd loved. The stranger slowed his horse, turning toward a line of dark pines in the distance. "My cabin's that way," he said quietly. "Ain't much, but it's dry." She said nothing, only nodded. The wind followed them into the dark, whispering across the plains like a memory refusing to fade. By morning the prairie would be nothing but ash and mist, and two souls, bound by loss and fate, would ride into a silence that neither had chosen, yet both somehow deserved. The night deepened into a cold that bit straight through wool and bone. Rain came slanting across the open land, hissing against the ground like a warning. Mary rode behind the stranger, her hands gripping the saddle horn, her eyes fixed on the faint outline of his shoulders. He didn't speak, didn't turn. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of hooves and the far-off groan of thunder rolling through the valley. The land stretched endless and empty around them, hills like the backs of sleeping beasts, trees twisted by wind, the faint smell of pine and smoke promising shelter somewhere ahead. Mary's heart thudded with every step the horse took. The grave felt far now, but grief was not a thing easily outridden. At last the stranger slowed his horse near a jagged ridge where the earth dropped into a narrow draw. He raised a hand for silence. Mary followed his gaze. Down below, the flicker of lanterns moved among the sage brush. 3, maybe 4 of them. Voices carried faintly through the storm. "Men, scavengers," he muttered. "They caught your trail." Mary felt her stomach turn cold. "What do they want?" "What every man wants when he's too lost to earn it," he said. "Gold, food, or worse." He dismounted, boots sinking into the wet grass, and motioned for her to do the same. "We'll wait till they pass." Mary slid down from the saddle, heart hammering, the shotgun heavy in her hands. She crouched behind a rock beside him. Lightning flared, and for an instant she saw his face, calm, sharp, unafraid. The kind of calm that came from men who'd lived too close to death. The lanterns below bobbed closer. Laughter rose, harsh, cruel, drunk on the scent of fear. "Best stay quiet," he whispered. "They can smell weakness quicker than blood." Mary pressed her lips shut, her breath clouding faintly in the rain. One of the riders shouted something crude. Another answered with a laugh that scraped like gravel. The stranger's hand rested on the revolver at his side. He didn't draw it, not yet. His eyes tracked every movement below with the stillness of a hunter. When the outlaws reached the slope, one of them called out, "Hey, there's fresh hoof prints up this way." Mary's pulse spiked. The stranger's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he murmured. Before she could answer, he moved, silent, deliberate, melting into the dark like a shadow come alive. The sound of boots and rain filled her ears, then a whisper of metal, a flash, one shot, then another. The ridge echoed with panic. Lanterns dropped, rolling into the mud. Men shouted, cursed, scattered into the storm. The scent of gunpowder burned the air. Mary's hands shook. She rose slightly, peering over the rocks. The stranger reappeared through the rain, his coat torn, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. 2 bodies lay motionless below. The others had fled. He climbed back up the ridge, eyes hard and voice low. "They won't be back tonight. Mary stared at him, unable to speak. The rain ran down his face, cutting through dirt and blood. He didn't seem to notice. "You killed them," she whispered. He nodded once. "Better them than you." She looked away, her throat tight. The words felt too sharp in the quiet that followed. The stranger wiped his revolver on his coat, holstered it, and looked toward the horizon. "We ride now. Cabin's another hour west. You'll freeze if we wait." Mary hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to trust him, yet the world behind them was darker than the one before. They rode again, silent except for the steady rhythm of rain on leather. The ridge fell behind them, the valley swallowed by fog. By the time the first light of dawn broke, the rain had thinned to mist. Steam rose from the horses, and the land glowed faintly gold beneath a low gray sky. Mary's eyes burned from lack of sleep. The stranger finally spoke. "Ain't far now. There's a creek ahead, runs down from the pines. My cabin's just past it." She said nothing, but she watched him closely. His voice carried a quiet exhaustion, as if he'd been running from something longer than the night itself. The creek appeared like a silver ribbon through the grass. They crossed it in silence. Water splashed against the horses' legs, cold and clear. As they climbed the last hill, the trees thickened, pines swaying softly in the wind. Smoke rose faintly from somewhere beyond, a thin gray column curling into the sky. Mary's heart fluttered despite herself. Smoke meant shelter, warmth, life. The stranger stopped his horse and turned slightly toward her. "Cabin's just ahead." She met his gaze. "What should I call you?" He hesitated. The pause stretched long enough for the wind to answer first. Then he said, "Call me Cole." She nodded, repeating the name quietly, as though testing it on her tongue. Cole dismounted, walked ahead, and pushed open a small gate half buried in snow and grass. The cabin sat nestled in the trees, smoke drifting from the chimney, the faint glow of firelight pulsing through a single window. "Go on inside," he said. "I'll stable the horses." Mary stood for a moment, unsure. Her husband's voice echoed faintly in memory. "Trust no man who hides his name." But she was too tired to fight the cold any longer. She stepped through the doorway, her boots scraping against the wooden floor, the scent of pine smoke and coffee filling the small room. Behind her, the door creaked shut. Rain still whispered against the roof, but inside, the world felt still. Cole lingered a moment outside, watching the forest, listening to the silence he'd come to know too well. Then he hung his hat on the wall, set his gun by the door, and crossed the room. Mary stood near the hearth, staring into the fire. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. Cole spoke softly. "You'll be safe here, ma'am." She didn't answer, only nodded. Outside, the wind carried the last cry of a wolf fading into the distance. By morning, the trail behind them would vanish beneath the rain, and only 2 sets of footprints would remain, leading into the pines, toward a cabin where trust was a fragile thing waiting to be born. Mary woke to silence, not the hollow kind that follows grief, but a thick, living quiet, the kind that belongs to deep woods after a storm. For the first time in days, the wind wasn't screaming through the cracks. It whispered instead, brushing the pines like fingers across an old hymn. She opened her eyes slowly. The cabin walls glowed amber from the low fire still burning in the hearth. Her body ached, every muscle, every bone, yet the ache was human, not hopeless. She sat up beneath a rough wool blanket, feeling warmth against her skin and the faint sting of bandages along her arm. Someone had tended her. Her gaze shifted to the corner. The stranger Cole sat near the door, hat brim low, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He didn't look up, though she knew he'd heard her stir. "You fainted last night," he said, voice quiet, low. "Cold took more out of you than you knew." Mary blinked, gathering her thoughts. How long was I out? Half a day, maybe more. He slid the gun into its holster and leaned back in the chair, Boots crossed. "You were burning up for a bit. Fever broke this morning." She looked toward the window. Outside, mist hung between the trees, silver and still. The air smelled of pine sap and wet earth clean, alive. "You shouldn't have brought me here," she murmured. "Maybe not," he said, "but leaving you out there weren't an option." The fire cracked softly. She studied him in the shifting light. His face looked different now, less a threat, more a question. The lines around his mouth spoke of long roads and longer regrets. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You live here alone, most days," he said. "Ain't much company 'cept the wind and the odd coyote." Mary glanced around. The place was small, but kept with quiet order, a narrow bed against the wall, shelves lined with tins, a rifle above the door. There was no sign of another life, no photographs, no woman's touch, just one man's silence stretched across 4 wooden walls. He rose and went to the fire, stirred the embers, poured coffee from a dented pot into a tin cup. The smell filled the room, bitter, grounding, almost holy. He handed it to her. "Here, you'll need it." She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing his for a brief second. The contact startled them both. His hand was warm, not gentle, but steady. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, retreating a step. "Don't thank me yet. Cabin's only safe 'cause no one knows it's here. If word gets out, it won't stay that way." Mary sipped the coffee, the heat burning her throat, pulling her fully back into herself. "You talk like a man expecting trouble." Cole gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "In my experience, trouble don't need much of an invitation." The words lingered in the air, heavy as rain clouds. By afternoon, she was strong enough to stand. Cole showed her the wash basin outside, the narrow stream behind the cabin. The forest was a world of green and gold pine needles slick with water, birds calling from somewhere unseen. Every breath felt raw and clean, as though she was being remade one inhale at a time. When she came back inside, Cole was splitting wood, his shirt sleeves rolled, muscles moving beneath the scars that crossed his forearms like pale lightning. He worked in silence, methodical, unhurried, the kind of man who'd learned to make peace with labor. Mary watched him a moment, then busied herself by folding her blanket. "You don't talk much," she said quietly. He looked up, the faintest ghost of a smile flickering across his mouth. "Talk's cheap out here. Folks waste it on things that don't matter. And what matters?" He set the axe down, leaned on it, eyes distant. "Doing right when you get the chance." The answer hit harder than she expected. She looked away, pretending to smooth the blanket again. "Seems like chances for that are few." "Maybe," he said, "but I try." The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythm, the sound of rain easing from the eaves, the crackle of fire, the soft scrape of boots on wood. He cooked beans and salt pork over the coals, served her first, then took his meal by the door. Neither spoke much while they ate, yet the silence felt less empty than before. Something unspoken was forming between them, fragile, uncertain, but real. That night, Mary lay awake on the cot he'd set up near the fire. Cole sat outside, his silhouette framed against the pale glow of the moon. She could see the edge of his profile through the window, watchful, still, a man guarding not just her safety, but his own soul. Her thoughts wandered to the grave she'd left behind, to the sound of her husband's voice calling her name across fields that would never grow green again. She turned on her side, clutching the blanket to her chest. Outside, a wolf howled far away. The cry slid through the trees, mournful and low. Cole didn't move. He just lifted his head, listening, then looked toward the cabin. His eyes found hers through the glass. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. The distance between them felt both impossible and necessary. By morning, the fire had burned low, and the forest shimmered beneath a thin veil of mist. Cole came in quietly, the smell of dawn on his coat. He poured coffee, set it near her bed, and said nothing. Mary sat up slowly, "I should be on my way soon," she said. He met her gaze. "Where to?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. The world beyond this cabin felt too wide, too empty, too cruel to face alone. Cole saw it in her silence. "You can stay a while," he said simply, "long as you need." She looked into his eyes, then truly looked, and for the first time since the funeral, the weight in her chest eased just enough to breathe. The wind changed outside, stirring the scent of pine and rain through the open door. The storm had passed, but something new had begun, quiet as dawn, fragile as forgiveness. Morning came soft through the pines. A slow light crept across the cabin floor, catching the faint curls of smoke rising from the hearth. Outside, the forest breathed mist lifting off the needles, water dripping from branch to branch, the quiet rhythm of a world that had survived another storm. Mary sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. The coffee was strong and bitter, just the way Cole drank it. She still hadn't grown used to the taste, but the warmth of it grounded her, something steady to hold onto in a life that had lost its shape. Cole was outside, chopping wood by the shed. Each swing of the axe echoed through the valley, sharp and sure. He worked like a man who needed noise to drown out the things that lived too loud inside his own head. Mary watched from the window. His shirt clung to his shoulders, damp with sweat despite the cold. He moved with a kind of grace that only came from surviving hard years, every motion precise, deliberate. She turned back to the table and began mending one of his shirts she'd found draped over a chair. The fabric was coarse, the seams torn, but her fingers remembered the rhythm. Needle, pull, knot. It had been years since she'd sewn for anyone but her husband. The thought stung, but she didn't pull away from it. Pain, she'd learned, was a kind of prayer out here, quiet, stubborn, and necessary. The door creaked open. Cole stepped in, carrying an armful of split logs. He nodded to her, setting them down by the stove. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." She answered, "Too quiet." He gave a faint chuckle. "You'll get used to it. The silence don't mean much out here. Sometimes it's just waitin' for the wind to talk again." She smiled barely. "You talk like a man who's been listening a long time." He shrugged, pulling off his gloves, maybe too long. He poured himself coffee and stood by the door, looking out at the pale sky. The world beyond that frame looked endless, the kind of vastness that could break a person if they stared at it too long. Mary spoke without thinking. "How long have you been here?" Cole took a slow sip. "A few years, long enough for the seasons to start. No. And my name." "Why this place?" she asked. He turned, met her gaze, because no one else would. There was a truth in his eyes she didn't dare question. She went back to stitching, the sound of the needle like a heartbeat between them. By midday, the air had warmed. Cole showed her how to patch the fence around the corral, where his 2 horses grazed. One was old and gray, the other a chestnut mare with eyes that watched the world like it was always on the edge of running. "You named them?" Mary asked, brushing her hand along the mare's neck. "Used to," he said. "Stopped naming things after I learned how easy it is to lose them." She looked at him, then really looked, and saw something raw in his expression. Regret, maybe, or memory. The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythm. She gathered herbs from the slope. He fixed the porch rail that had come loose in the storm. They spoke little, but their silence began to change shape, less guarded, more alive. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in amber, Mary lit the lamp and started supper. The smell of beans and onions filled the small cabin. Cole came in, washing his hands in the basin, his face tired but peaceful. "You can cook," he said, a hint of surprise in his tone. She smiled faintly. "Used to, haven't had much reason to lately." He sat across from her, the lamplight flickering between them. For a moment neither moved. Then he said, "You don't have to stay here forever. Once you're rested, I can take you west. There's a town past the ridge. Safer there." Mary's hands stilled. "And what about you?" He looked down at his plate. Safer ain't exactly what follows me around." The words hung heavy in the air. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the weight in his voice told her not to. After supper, he stepped outside to smoke. Mary joined him on the porch. The night was calm, no thunder, no gunfire, just the soft murmur of crickets and the scent of pine smoke curling upward into the stars. "Strange," she said quietly, "how peaceful it can be after so much ruin." Cole nodded. "The land forgets faster than people do." They stood in silence, side by side, the night breathing around them. A coyote called in the distance, long and low. The sound drifted between them like a memory neither could name. Mary looked at him, her voice a whisper. "You've done bad things, haven't you?" He didn't answer right away. He took a drag from his cigarette, exhaled slow, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yeah," he said finally, "enough to know peace don't come free. She didn't flinch, and yet you gave it to me." His gaze shifted toward her, the faintest flicker of something, surprise, maybe even guilt, crossing his face. "Maybe I owed the world one good deed. Or maybe," she said softly, "you're tired of running." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since they'd met, his guard slipped. The storm in his eyes quieted, just for a breath. Inside, the fire crackled, and the smell of smoke and coffee lingered between them, a comfort they hadn't known they needed. By midnight, the cabin had gone still. Mary lay awake, listening to the wind ease through the trees, thinking of the man on the other side of the wall, a man she didn't yet understand, but whose presence made the silence feel less like a punishment and more like a beginning. And as the coals dimmed in the hearth, the first fragile thread of trust stretched between them, thin as smoke, but strong enough to hold through the night. Dawn came pale and cold, the kind that crept slow through the trees and settled heavy over the land. Cole was already awake, sitting at the table with a ledger open before him. The fire had burned low, the last embers glowing faint and red like tired eyes. He wasn't reading. He was staring at a single page, one name written in faded ink, the letters uneven and hurried, Elias Ward. A name he hadn't said aloud in years. Outside, the first sound of morning rose the soft snort of a horse, the groan of timber as the wind shifted down the ridge. Mary stirred in the small bedroom, the floor creaking beneath her step. She appeared in the doorway wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose, eyes still heavy from sleep. "Couldn't rest?" she asked. Cole shut the ledger gently. "Never been much for sleepin' when the past's got a hold of my mind." She nodded, coming closer, the quiet between them familiar now. "That name," she said softly, her eyes falling on the closed book. "Elias Ward, someone you knew." Cole's jaw tightened. "Used to. Not sure if that counts for much anymore." He rose, poured himself coffee, then poured a cup for her. The air between them felt different this morning, thicker, weighted by something unsaid. Mary sat opposite him, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "The way you say his name sounds like it still matters." Cole looked out the window. The horizon was a thin gray line, the promise of light still far away. "He was a friend once. We rode together, then we didn't." Mary waited. He didn't go on. Instead, he stood, took his coat from the hook, and reached for his hat. "I'm ridden into the ridge today," he said. "There's a trap line I set a few miles out. I'll be back by sundown." She rose too. "Do you want me to come?" He looked at her, a long, searching look that felt like it reached somewhere he hadn't let anyone touch in years. "Not this time." He stepped outside, boots crunching through the frost. The door shut behind him with a soft thud, and the cabin felt emptier than it had in days. Mary stood there a long while, the echo of his absence pressing against the walls. She moved to the window, watching him mount his horse and ride off through the mist, his figure fading into the gray like a ghost swallowed by the land. Cole rode hard through the valley, the cold air biting against his face. The trail wound along the riverbank where the trees grew sparse, their branches skeletal against the sky. He wasn't heading to any trapline. He hadn't set one. He was going to the ridge because that's where the letter had come from. 3 days ago, he'd found it pinned to his barn door, no name. Just 4 words scrawled in familiar handwriting. You still owe blood. He'd burned the note before dawn, but he couldn't burn the memory of who had written it. Elias Ward had once been closer than a brother. They'd fought side by side, robbed the same trains, run from the same law, until one night, Cole walked away, left Elias to face the noose alone. He'd heard rumors over the years, whispers that Elias had escaped, that he'd made his way north. But Cole had never believed them, until now. Now the words in that letter were following him like a shadow he couldn't shake. Back at the cabin, Mary tried to busy herself with chores. She washed dishes, swept the floor, tended to the fire. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the man who had ridden off without looking back. She found the ledger still on the table. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The pages were filled with numbers, names, small notes written in a hand that spoke of habit, not hope. But near the middle, one page stopped her cold, a sketch of a symbol she didn't understand. A coiled serpent wrapped around a star. Beneath it, just 2 words, the Ward boys. She closed the book quickly, the sound of the leather cover snapping shut echoing too loud in the quiet room. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of a hawk crying somewhere over the ridge. It made her uneasy. By late afternoon, the light began to change. She stepped out to fetch water from the stream, glancing toward the horizon for any sign of him. The sun was dipping low when she finally saw movement, a rider coming slow down the trail. But it wasn't Cole. The man on the horse was broad, shouldered, wearing a dark coat and a hat pulled low. Even from a distance, she could feel the danger in his stillness. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, his horse pawing at the dirt. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called out. His voice carried a drawl sharp as a knife. "Fine place you got here." Mary's heart kicked hard. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Reckon I'm looking for someone. Tall fella, gray coat, goes by the name Cole Hart. You wouldn't have seen him around, would you?" She froze, gripping the water pail. "No," she lied softly. "Ain't seen anyone by that name." He studied her for a moment, then tipped his hat. "Much obliged." He turned his horse as if to leave, then looked back. "You tell him when he shows. Elias Ward remembers." Mary's breath caught. The man spurred his horse and rode off into the trees, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading into dusk. When Cole finally returned an hour later, his horse lathered and his face drawn, Mary was waiting on the porch. "There was a man here," she said quietly. "He asked for you." Cole stopped in his tracks. What did he say? She met his eyes, fear and truth tangled in her voice. He said, "Elias Ward remembers." The color drained from Cole's face. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, heavy, and alive with something darker than the storm that had brought her here. Cole looked toward the ridge, where the last light of day was dying, and said in a low voice, "Then the past just found us." Night had fallen heavy over the pines. The cabin glowed faintly, a fragile island of light in a sea of dark. The fire cracked, steady but low, the kind of flame that spoke more of waiting than warmth. Cole sat by it, hands clasped, eyes lost somewhere deep in the embers. The silence between him and Mary was the kind that stretched thin and dangerous, like the stillness before a gunshot. He hadn't spoken since she'd said the name, Elias Ward. Now, when he finally did, his voice was a rasp against the quiet. "You should have run when you had the chance." Mary stood near the table, her shawl drawn close. "Run where, Cole? There's nowhere left to go. You knew that?" He looked up at her eyes, weary, rimmed in shadow. "You don't understand what that name means. Elias. He ain't a man who lets ghosts lie still." She swallowed. "Then tell me. Make me understand." The clock ticked once, twice. The fire popped. Cole leaned forward. elbows on his knees, voice low and rough. I rode with him once, years ago before I came up here. We were part of the ward gang. Small time at first, a few stage runs, a rail car or two. Then it turned bloody. Elias started enjoying it. He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. I wanted out, told him so. He laughed, said no one walks away from blood like that. I left anyway. Mary's eyes softened, but her voice stayed quiet. And my husband? The question hung like a blade. Cole stared into the fire. His jaw worked, once, before the words came out. I wasn't there that night. I swear it. But I rode with the men who were. Rode under the same name. Wore the same dust. Doesn't much matter if my hands stayed clean. They still helped load the rifles. Mary's breath trembled. Her fingers tightened around her shawl as if to hold herself together. You mean to tell me you were part of the gang that... He looked at her then, eyes raw, voice breaking. Yes, I was one of them. I left before they hit your town. But that don't wash the blood off me. The room seemed to shrink. The walls groaned, the fire hissed, and outside, the wind clawed at the shutters like an old ghost, demanding to be let in. Mary took a step back. The man she'd trusted, the man who'd saved her, suddenly felt like a stranger all over again. You should go, she said, voice trembling. Right now. Cole stood, slow, almost reluctant. I figured you'd say that. He reached for his hat, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, I never meant for you to find out like this. I just wanted you safe. Mary's voice was sharp, but her hands shook. Safe from you. He winced at that, not from anger, but from something deeper. Then he nodded once, as if taking a verdict. Reckon that's fair. He stepped out into the cold. The door shut behind him with a hollow sound, and the wind rushed in where warmth had been. Hours passed. The fire burned down to its bones. Mary sat alone, her eyes dry but her chest aching. The world outside howled, and with every gust, she thought of his horse disappearing into the pines. She tried to hate him, she wanted to, but the truth wouldn't bend. He could have lied. He could have hidden the past and stayed beside her. Instead, he chose to speak it, the whole terrible truth. And somehow that honesty hurt worse than the lie ever would have. She rose finally, restless, and walked to the door. The wind caught her hair, the air cold and sharp on her face. Down the hill the trail was swallowed in fog, no sign of him. Still, she whispered, as if the forest could hear, why did you come back for me? Only the pines answered, whispering secrets through their endless dark. By morning, the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, quiet. Mary went about her chores like a ghost, though her eyes kept drifting to the ridge. The silence in the cabin had changed. It was no longer peace, but absence. When she stepped outside to fetch wood, she noticed something strange, a single shape half buried near the fence line. She knelt, brushed snow away, and found it. Cole's knife, the handle cracked, blade dulled by age. He'd left it there on purpose. She picked it up, turned it in her hand, and saw an engraving she'd never noticed before, small, worn letters, for the debts unpaid. Her heart sank. Somewhere out there, Cole Hart was not running. He was waiting. He'd made camp near the ridge, not far from the river. The storm had eased, but the air carried a strange stillness, like the land itself was holding its breath. Cole sat by the fire, sharpening an old revolver with the patience of a man who'd already made peace with dying. Every scrape of the whetstone echoed like a prayer. When a twig snapped behind him, he didn't turn. You always were bad at sneakin', Elias. The reply came cold and amused. And you always were bad at finishin' what you started. Elias Ward stepped from the dark, the same snake-etched coat, the same grin. The years hadn't softened him. They'd carved him into something harder. Cole stood slow, his revolver still at his side. You came all this way. I reckon you're not here to talk. Elias chuckled. Talkin's overrated, but I do appreciate a man who stays put. Saves me the trouble of huntin'. He drew his gun. Cole didn't move. If it's me you want, then take it. But the woman back at that cabin, she's got nothing to do with this. Elias tilted his head, a cruel smile twitching. She's got everything to do with it, brother. You always had a weakness for savin what don't need savin. Cole's jaw tightened. You stay away from her. Elias laughed a sound that made the night colder. Then, I reckon you'd best come stop me. And with that, the man who'd once been his brother turned, vanishing into the storm that rolled low across the ridge. Cole holstered his gun, face like stone. There was only one way this could end. He mounted his horse and rode toward the fading glow of the cabin, the snow rising behind him like smoke. Inside, Mary sat awake by the window, the knife still in her hand. She didn't know what had driven her to stay, fear, guilt, or something deeper. But when she heard hoofbeats through the storm, her heart rose and fell all at once. The door opened and Cole stepped in, covered in snow, eyes dark as ash. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded once, setting his gun on the table. "I had to. He's comin', and he ain't stoppin' till one of us is gone." She stared at him, voice trembling. "Then why tell me to send you away?" He looked at her, that quiet, steady look she'd come to know. "'Cause I'd rather die for you than make you live with what I've done." The fire flickered, the snow kept falling, and in that fragile silence she understood what love sometimes costs and what it's worth. The blizzard came down hard that night, swallowing the ridge in white. Wind screamed against the shutters, and snow piled thick on the roof till it groaned under its own weight. Inside the cabin, the world shrank to the size of a fire's glow, and the space between two hearts trying not to break. Mary had lit every lantern she owned, though the light flickered weak, a soft golden shimmer that trembled over the walls. Cole sat near the hearth, one shoulder wrapped in bandage where the cold had bitten deep. He hadn't said much since he'd returned. His hat and coat hung by the door, heavy with frost. His gun rested beside him, polished, loaded, ready. Mary poured hot water into a basin, her movements quiet but sure. She'd been tending him all evening without a word, her face pale in the lamplight. "You should rest," she said softly. Cole looked up, eyes dark beneath the brim of shadow. "Storm like this, ain't no sleep worth the risk. Man like Elias don't stop for weather." She wrung the cloth and set it against his wound. "You don't stop either." He flinched, then stilled. "Ain't got much choice, do I?" Silence fell between them again, filled only by the hiss of the fire and the moan of wind clawing at the door. Mary looked at him a long while, the stubble along his jaw, the scar that traced the line of his temple, the way his eyes carried both danger and sorrow in equal weight. Finally she said, "Tell me something true, Cole. Not about your past, not about him, about you." He met her gaze. The quiet stretched. "I used to think I was born mean," he said at last. "Thought it was in my blood. My pa was a drunk, my brothers turned to thieves. I figured that was the only road I'd ever walk. Then one day I saw a man die for something good. Not money, not pride, just good. Changed me, or maybe just made me see what I wasn't." Mary's voice was soft as snow falling, and now, he smiled faintly, a sad, worn thing. "Now I'm sittin' here with a woman I don't deserve, waitin' for death to knock on my door." She didn't look away. "If you truly didn't deserve me, you wouldn't have come back." The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. He looked at her like a man staring at light after years in the dark. His breath caught, his hand tightened around the armrest as though keeping still might keep him from saying what burned behind his teeth. "Mary." She set the cloth aside. "Say it. I ain't no savior," he murmured. "You keep looking at me like I am, but I'm not. I came back 'cause I couldn't stand thinking of him layin' hands on you. That ain't righteousness, that's need." Her heartbeat faltered. The room seemed smaller, the fire louder. "And if it's need," she said, her voice barely more than breath, "then say what kind." Cole looked down, hands trembling slightly. The kind a man carries when he's been cold too long. Outside, the wind roared like a wild thing. He rose suddenly, pacing, his boots scuffing against the floor. "You should hate me, Mary. You should have let me die out there." She stood too, her voice firm now. "Don't tell me what I should feel." He turned, eyes burning, torn between wanting and restraint. "You don't understand what I've done. Then make me understand." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped one sharp sound, like a gunshot in the quiet. Cole's voice came rough. "When I left the gang, I thought I could live clean. Tried working cattle out by the picos, tried forget in the faces, but they never leave you, the ones you hurt, the ones you couldn't save. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw your husband's town burning." He drew a slow breath. "So when I found you out there burying him, I told myself it was fate giving me one last chance to do right." Mary's eyes shone, the pain and compassion warring inside her. "And have you?" He shook his head. "No, I just found something else to lose." She stepped closer, close enough to see the tremor in his jaw, then stopped, losing it. He looked at her, and the fight in him broke. The storm outside crashed against the windows. Inside, the firelight swayed, shadows trembling over their faces. He lifted a hand, slow, hesitant, then let his fingers brush the side of her face. She didn't pull away. For a long, fragile heartbeat, neither moved. Then she leaned into his touch, eyes closed, the first tear sliding warm against his calloused thumb. "Don't stop," she whispered. His breath caught a single shudder through his chest. And though every memory screamed for distance, every ghost warned against it, he drew her close, his forehead resting against hers, the world falling away until there was only the sound of her breath, the warmth of her skin, and the fragile mercy of the moment. Time seemed to slow. The storm outside raged, but inside the cabin, something else began to thaw, a lifetime of guilt, melting in the quiet where forgiveness took root. When they finally pulled apart, it wasn't passion that lingered, it was peace. Mary spoke first, voice steady, almost breaking. "If tomorrow comes, I want to face it beside you, not as a widow, not as your sin, just as two people trying to make something right." Cole's throat worked, his eyes glassed with emotion he couldn't speak. "You got no idea what you're signing up for." She smiled faintly, brushing the tears from her cheek. "I do. I'm signing up for you." The firelight burned low, golden and quiet. The storm began to ease. And for the first time in years, Cole Hart closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from the fragile, terrifying comfort of hope. By morning, the blizzard had passed. The world outside lay still and white, blank as a promise waiting to be written. Cole stirred first, his hand resting near hers where they'd fallen asleep by the hearth. The air smelled of ash and pine, clean and cold. He looked toward the window, where sunlight tried to break through the frost. For a moment he let himself believe they'd been spared, but when he stepped outside, the snow told a different story. 2 sets of boot tracks, 1 man, 1 horse circled the cabin. The past hadn't gone. It was waiting. The snow had settled thick around the cabin, muffling every sound except the low crackle of the fire and the faint whisper of wind through the pines. Morning light slanted through the frosted windows, soft and gold, touching Mary's hair where she slept near the hearth. Cole stood at the window, motionless. His breath fogged the glass as he studied the tracks outside, deep, deliberate prints circling the cabin, then vanishing into the trees. Whoever left them had been close. Too close. He turned away, his jaw tight. The warmth of the night before already felt like a memory fading too fast. Mary stirred, waking slow. "You didn't sleep," she murmured, voice thick with drowsiness. "No," he said quietly. "Didn't seem right to." She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "Something's wrong." He hesitated. "Tracks, out front. Someone's been here." Her heart quickened. "Elias." Cole nodded once. "He's close. Closer than I thought." Silence followed, heavy, trembling. The kind that pressed against your ribs till it hurt to breathe. He moved to the table, began checking his gun, counting cartridges, movements calm and practiced. Mary watched him, her chest tightening. She'd seen him quiet before, but never like this, never with the kind of stillness that meant a man was already halfway gone. "You're going after him, aren't you?" Cole looked up, meeting her gaze. "Ain't got much choice." "Yes, you do," she said sharply. "You could stay. We could leave at first light, head south, find—" He shook his head. "He won't stop, Mary. Not till I'm in the ground." She rose, taking a step toward him. "Then let me help." He almost smiled, not in mockery, but in grief. "You already did." Her throat tightened. "Don't say that like you're already dead." Cole holstered the revolver, fastened his coat, and turned toward the door. "It's not death I'm afraid of." "Then what?" He hesitated, the light catching the scar along his jaw. "Leaving you to live with the man who brought all this to your door." She stepped in front of him, blocking the way. "Don't you dare decide my forgiveness for me." For a moment, neither moved. The fire popped behind them. The air smelled of smoke and winter, and something human, fragile, impossible, alive. "Mary." His voice was rough, barely there. She looked up at him, eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. "If you walk out that door, you take every chance we ever had with you." His breath trembled. "If I stay, I might bring hell down on your head." "Then let it come," she whispered. "Just don't go where I can't follow." He closed his eyes, shaking his head as though trying to bury the feeling clawing up from his chest. But when she reached for him, fingertips brushing his coat sleeve, the last of his restraint broke. Her hand found his face, and he leaned into it, eyes burning with all the words he'd never learned to say. "Don't stop," she said, her voice breaking on the edge of plea and prayer. He froze one heartbeat, two, then kissed her like a dying man reaching for the light. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, raw, full of the ache of years lost and the fear of hours left. The storm outside had quieted, but inside the cabin, another one began, her fingers tangled in his shirt. His breath shuddered against her throat. The fire caught in the hearth, rising high, throwing wild light across their faces, two souls undone and reborn in the same fragile instant. When they pulled apart, both trembling, she pressed her forehead against his. "Don't you dare leave me again." He smiled faintly, that rare, broken smile that made her heart ache. "I ain't leavin', not till it's done." By midday, the snow began to melt, dripping from the eaves in slow, steady beats. Cole saddled his horse, tightening the cinch with quiet precision. Mary stood by the fence, her shawl pulled tight, the wind tugging at her hair. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed every movement. He swung into the saddle, looking down at her one last time. "If I don't come back, you will," she said firmly. "You promised." He nodded once. "Lock the door, keep the rifle loaded. If you hear anything strange, I'll wait," she interrupted softly. "That's what I'll do." He wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come, so he tipped his hat, turned his horse toward the ridge, and rode into the thinning snow. Mary watched until he disappeared between the trees. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was a silence that held its breath. Cole followed the trail north, where the land rose into low hills. The air was sharp, the sky pale and distant. He could feel Elias out there, not in sight, but close, the way a man feels a storm before he sees it. At a narrow pass, he found the sign he'd been waiting for, a cigarette stub, still warm in the snow. He dismounted, scanning the ridge. Nothing, just the wind. Then a voice drifted from behind the rocks. "Didn't take you long." Cole turned slow, hand hovering near his gun. "You always liked the high ground." Elias stepped into view, revolver loose at his side. His coat flapped in the wind, the serpent emblem catching the light. "You could have stayed gone, brother. Could have lived quiet." Cole's eyes hardened. "You came after her. That ended any quiet left to live." Elias grinned. "So this is about the widow, huh? You think she'll love you once she knows what you done to her life. She already does." Elias's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "Then I guess I'll just have to remind her what kind of man you are." The words were still hanging when the first gunshot cracked the air. Coal Dove rolled behind a fallen log and returned fire. The sound echoed through the hills, scattering the crows from the trees. Snow burst in plumes where bullets hit. Two men, once brothers, now strangers bound by the same blood and sin, trading bullets under a sky too wide to care. When the smoke cleared, only the wind moved. Back at the cabin, Mary stood by the window, fingers clutching the rifle. She didn't know what she was waiting for: a sound, a sign, a shadow moving through the pines. But then she saw it, footprints again, fresh ones leading straight toward the door. Her heart froze. She raised the rifle, stepping back as the latch rattled once, then fell still. Outside, the wind carried a faint voice, a man's voice, low and rough, calling her name. "Mary!" It wasn't Cole. The fire dimmed, and fear crawled through her bones. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Cole reloaded his last cartridge, snow stained with blood beside him. He looked toward the distant plume of smoke that marked his cabin, and his voice broke in a whisper the storm carried away. "Hold on, Mary. The fight wasn't done. The price of love had yet to be paid." The morning came gray and thin, a pale wash of light spilling over the snow. Cole's horse stood restless beneath him, breath rising in soft white plumes. Every muscle in his body ached from the night before. The fight, the fall, the memories. But pain didn't slow him. It reminded him he was still alive, and that meant he still had something left to do. The ridge behind him was silent now, except for the faint whistle of wind through pine needles. Elias had vanished again, like smoke over the prairie, but Cole knew he'd circle back. Men like Elias always did. He turned the horse south toward Hollow Creek, the nearest town, the last piece of civilization before the desert. The snow thinned as he rode, giving way to mud, to thawing ground, to the faint outline of telegraph poles standing like crooked teeth against the horizon. He hadn't been to Hollow Creek in years, not since before the war, not since before everything that made him the man who couldn't sleep without a loaded gun under his pillow. By midday, he reached the edge of town. The streets were slick with melting snow, ruts cutting deep through the mud. Wagons creaked by, their wheels spitting brown water. The sign above the general store swung weakly in the wind. Cole rode straight down the center, slow and deliberate, eyes scanning every face that turned his way. He saw recognition in some, fear in others. He'd been wanted once, still was in some territories, but Hollow Creek had a way of forgetting fast and forgiving slow. He stopped outside the sheriff's office, swung down from the saddle, and tied his horse to the post. The door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and old tobacco hung thick. Sheriff Danner looked up from his desk, gray, bearded and slow, moving, but his hand never strayed far from the revolver on his belt. "Well, I'll be damned," Danner muttered. "Cole Tanner, walking into my office like a man looking for a noose." Cole took off his hat, brushed the snow from the brim. "Ain't looking for trouble. Good. 'Cause last time you were here, we ran out of cells before sundown." Cole stepped forward. "I ain't here for me. I'm here for Elias Kane." The sheriff leaned back, one brow raised. "Kane, you mean the bastard run in the North Pass gang? That's him. Word is, he's wanted dead or alive in 3 states. Big bounty, you say, and you found him." Cole nodded once. "Found him, but he ain't dead yet." Danner studied him, suspicion crawling into his tone. "You tellin' me you're huntin' him for the law now? Thought you quit that life." "I didn't," Cole said quietly. "But he came for me, and for a woman I swore to protect." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "A woman?" Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. Danner sighed, rubbed his chin. "You know, Cole, every time you say the word protect, someone ends up buried." Cole's jaw tightened. Then, maybe this time I'll make sure it's the right man. He left the office with a small packet of ammunition, a clean rifle, and a thin promise that the sheriff would send word if he heard of Elias nearby. Outside, the wind had picked up. The church bell rang in the distance, calling the town to prayer or warning. He couldn't tell which anymore. He walked his horse down the street toward the livery. The smell of hay and smoke met him like a memory he didn't want. "Cole, Tanner!" A voice called behind him. He turned. A young deputy, barely old enough to shave, stood near the saloon steps, holding a folded paper. His hands shook a little, but his eyes were steady. "Got something you'll want to see," the deputy said, handing him the paper. Cole unfolded it slowly. It was a wanted poster. Fresh ink. Name, Mary Lane. Charge, accessory to murder. Reward, $500. His blood went cold. "Who put this out?" he asked, voice low. "Ryder came through this morning. Said orders came from the marshal in Fort Rowan. Said she helped the outlaw Cole Tanner kill 2 men near the ridge." Cole stared at the paper until the ink bled into his vision. Then he folded it once, tight, and slipped it into his coat. Where'd the rider go? Didn't say. Headed east, maybe. Cole turned toward the stables, his mind already burning with what he had to do next. Elias was moving faster than he thought, and he'd just painted a target on Mary's back. By sunset, Cole was riding hard through the canyon, wind tearing at his coat. The trail blurred under him, his thoughts louder than the horse's hooves. He'd left her alone too long. Every word she'd said last night came back in flashes. Her trembling voice, the way she'd whispered "don't stop," the fear she'd tried to hide when he said he had to leave. He could see her face in every shadow. When the first lights of the cabin came into view through the dark trees, relief hit him sharp and painful. Smoke curled from the chimney. The fire was still burning. He slowed his horse, dismounted quietly, and moved toward the porch. Then he saw it. The door was open. One hinge hung loose, swaying in the wind. Inside, the fire still burned, but the room was empty. The blanket she'd wrapped around herself last night lay on the floor, torn. The rifle was gone. Cole stepped forward, heart hammering in his chest. On the table, a single bullet rested beside a folded scrap of paper. He opened it with shaking hands. "Don't come for me. He said he'd spare you if I went. Mary." The paper slipped from his fingers. Outside, the night howled through the pines. Cole closed his eyes, the weight of every mistake pressing down till he could hardly breathe. Then he picked up the bullet, slid it into the chamber, and whispered, "Sorry, Mary, but you should have known better." He mounted up, turned toward the dark horizon, and rode. The West didn't forgive love. It tested it, and now it was about to see what his was worth. The night cracked open with thunder and hoofbeats. Cole rode like the devil, was nipping his heels, eyes burning against the cold air, heart thrashing inside his chest. The snow had turned to rain, hard, cold, relentless, and it slicked the trail with mud that swallowed hooves and prayers alike. He could still see her in his mind, Mary, standing in the cabin's doorway with fear burning through her calm, the firelight soft against her face. The note she'd left was burned into his thoughts like scripture. Don't come for me, but she should have known. He would. He always would. The tracks led north, toward the river bend. A wide sweep of ice and rock that cut through the valley like a wound. The prints were fresh. 2 riders, one forced, one leading. Elias's doing, no doubt. He'd always liked to make people watch him win. By dawn, Cole crested the ridge above Hollow Creek and spotted smoke rising from the old rail station. The building had been abandoned since the line was rerouted. Nothing left but shattered windows and a roof that leaked more than it sheltered. It was the kind of place Elias would choose. Quiet, hidden, easy to burn when done. Cole slid off his horse and crouched low, checking the rifle's chamber. He breathed once, steady. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat, streaking the scar on his cheek. He could hear voices through the storm. One was Elias, low, smooth, the same voice that once led men to kill for nothing more than a share of whiskey and a lie about freedom. The other voice trembled when it spoke, soft but defiant, Mary. Inside the railhouse, Elias leaned against a broken beam, arms folded, the edge of his grin sharp as the knife at his hip. "You should have stayed in that cabin, Mrs. Cartwright," he said. "Ain't no place out here for mercy. That man you're defendin', he ain't the hero you think." Mary sat tied to a chair, wrists raw from the rope. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with dirt and rain, but her eyes, those steady, stubborn eyes, held. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "He's not the same as you." Elias laughed, head tilting back. "No, I taught him everything he knows. Hell, I made him. Only difference between us is he got soft." He crouched close, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "What'd he tell you, huh? That he left the gang 'cause he found his conscience? Don't believe that. Cole Tanner ran 'cause he wanted a bigger name than mine." Mary met his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe, but at least he stopped running." Elias's grin faded. "We'll see about that." He turned toward the door, motioning to one of his men, a young outlaw with a scar over his lip. "Keep her here. If Tanner shows, you fire first." The boy nodded. Elias stepped out into the rain, his boots sinking into the mud. Cole watched from the tree line, every nerve alive. He could see the figures inside through the broken windows. The woman, bound, her breath fogging the air. The man standing guard with his rifle loose in his hand. Cole took aim, his heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm of the falling rain. One squeeze, one breath. The shot cracked through the dawn. The guard fell where he stood. Mary gasped, flinching as the window shattered. Cole was already moving, through the doorway, boots hitting the boards hard, rifle raised. Elias spun, gun drawn, eyes wide with fury and shock. "Knew you'd come, brother." Cole fired again. The bullet tore through the air, missing by inches as Elias ducked behind a crate. "Let her go, Elias," Cole shouted, voice raw. Elias's laughter echoed like thunder. "You ain't changed one damn bit. Always fight in ghosts instead of tackin' what's yours." The next shot came from behind a pillar, splintering the wall beside Cole's head. He ducked, reloaded, and moved closer, step by step. Mary struggled against the ropes, breath short and fast. "Cole, I see you, darlin'," he said softly. "Hold on." The fight was quick but brutal. Elias moved like smoke, darting, shooting, vanishing behind the rain, slick shadows. Cole pressed forward, every motion deliberate, his eyes tracking the faintest flicker of movement. When the gunfire stopped, silence filled the room like floodwater. Elias's voice came low, taunting. "Ain't it funny how it always comes down to you and me? You kill me, you kill the last part of yourself that remembers who you were." Cole stepped into the open. "That part died long before you." Elias grinned, teeth white in the dark. "Then let's bury it proper." They fired at the same breath. Cole's bullet struck first. Elias staggered, the revolver slipping from his hand, blood blooming dark against his coat. He hit the wall, slid down and laughed, weak, gurgling, almost tender. "Guess you got your redemption after all," he whispered. "Too bad it won't bring her peace." Cole stood over him, chest heaving, gun still warm. "Peace ain't something you earn, it's something you protect." Elias's eyes dimmed, the laughter fading into rain. Cole dropped to his knees beside Mary, cutting the ropes with his knife. Her hands shook as he pulled her close, feeling her breath against his chest. "You came," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Told you I would." She looked up at him, eyes wet but fierce. "You could have died." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Would have been worth it." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the storm began to break, the clouds thinning into strips of gray light. Mary's hand found his, fingers curling tight. "What now?" Cole looked toward the horizon, where dawn was pushing through. "Now we finish what we started." They rode out from the ruin just as the first sun touched the valley. Behind them, Smoke rose from the old rail house, Elias's grave marked not by stone, but by fire and silence. Ahead, the plains stretched wide and clean, washed new by rain. Cole didn't look back. He didn't need to. The past was finally behind them, and the only thing that mattered was the woman riding beside him, her hair catching the light, her voice breaking the quiet with a single truth neither could deny. "You're free now, Cole." He looked at her, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. "So are you." And as the trail curved west, the sound of their horses faded into the wind. Two souls bound by loss, riding toward whatever waited beyond the horizon. The wind returned before dawn, sharp, cold, and whispering through the pines like a warning. Cole Tanner swayed in the saddle, blood seeping through his coat, staining the snow with a trail that led nowhere but down. Mary rode beside him, her hands tight on the reins, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if sheer will could hold him upright. He hadn't said a word since they left Hollow Creek. Every breath came ragged. His hat hung low over his brow, shadows swallowing the pain that had already begun to hollow him from the inside. The world had gone quiet again, save for the horses and the slow crack of ice under their hooves. Even the birds stayed hidden. When the ridge finally gave way to the open plain, Cole's horse stumbled, knees buckling. He caught himself with one hand on the horn, teeth gritted, a groan breaking from deep in his chest. "Cole," Mary pulled her horse close, leapt down, and caught his arm before he fell. The smell of blood hit her hard, warm, metallic, unending. She pressed her hand against the wound beneath his ribs, feeling the steady pulse of life, trying not to slip away. "It's not bad," she lied. He gave her a faint smile. "You always were a terrible liar." They made camp in a small hollow by the riverbank, snow drifting in quiet sheets around them. Mary built a fire with shaking hands, every spark feeling like a prayer. Cole lay on his back, staring up through the trees, the sky beyond a pale gray that promised more storm. She tore what was left of her skirt and pressed the cloth to his wound, biting back the fear clawing at her throat. "Stay still," she murmured. He chuckled, weak but sincere. "Wasn't planning on dancing. Don't joke." His eyes flicked toward her, softer now. "If I don't, you'll start crying again." She stopped, the cloth trembling in her hands. The memory of Hollow Creek, the gunfire, the blood, Elias falling, was still raw. She looked at him, her voice cracking. "You shouldn't have gone back there alone. You weren't supposed to follow," he said, closing his eyes. "Didn't want you see, in what I had to do." "I don't care what you had to do," she said fiercely. "I care that you came back to me." He opened his eyes again, searching her face like he was trying to memorize it. "That's the problem, Mary. You keep giving me things I don't deserve." The hours crawled. The storm thickened. Snow fell heavier, wrapping the world in white silence. Mary fed the fire, boiled what little water she could find, and forced him to drink. His skin had gone pale beneath the beard, sweat gathering on his forehead despite the cold. "You're not dying here," she said, more to herself than to him. Cole smiled faintly. "You bossing me again?" "Yes." He nodded once, as if that alone was enough to promise obedience. "Good." When she brushed his hair back, her fingers found the scar near his temple, a reminder of some old wound he'd never spoken of. She traced it gently. "Does it hurt?" She whispered. "Not anymore." His gaze drifted toward the fire. "You remember that night, when the blizzard hit, and you told me not to stop?" Her breath caught. "I remember. I ain't stopped since," he said. "Not from that moment." Her throat tightened. "Then don't stop now." He smiled, eyes half closed. "You make that sound easy." By midnight the fire burned low. Mary sat awake beside him, the rifle within reach, the world beyond their small circle of light buried in snow and shadow. Cole stirred once, his breath shallow. "Mary, I'm here. Don't let me sleep too long. If I close my eyes, I might not wake. She took his hand and squeezed it tight. Then I'll keep talking. He chuckled weakly. About what? Anything, she whispered. About spring comin' soon, about the creek thawin', about buildin' a new place, maybe near the river. He smiled barely. A cabin, yes. His fingers curled faintly around hers. You'll have to build it yourself, you know. Then you'll have to get better, she said, her voice trembling. Because I can't lift logs alone. He opened his eyes again, the faintest spark still burning there. Bossy woman, stubborn man. The night stretched long, broken only by the hiss of snow and the faint crackle of wood. Then, as dawn began to edge across the sky, Cole coughed, hard blood bright against his lips. Mary caught him, pressing his head against her shoulder. Panic clawed through her chest. Cole, look at me. Just breathe, please. He tried, but the sound came rough, shallow. His hand found her face, thumb brushing the tear that slipped down her cheek. I told you, he whispered. You were safer without me. She shook her head, clutching him tighter. Don't you say that. Not after everything. You got a way of mackin' a man forget who he was. Then forget. She said, tears falling freely now. Forget it all, just stay. He tried to smile, but it faltered. You. Pray, Mary. Her breath hitched. She hadn't prayed since her husband's death. The words had always felt hollow, like dust. But now, as she held Cole in her arms, something deep within her cracked open. Yes, she whispered. I'm prayin' now. He closed his eyes, and she pressed her forehead against his, the words trembling from her lips. God, don't take him, not yet, please. The snow lightened. The first morning rays broke through the clouds, painting the frozen world gold. Cole's breathing slowed but steadied, faint and uneven, like a fire refusing to die. Mary sat there long after the sun rose, her arms still around him, her tears drying against his coat. He wasn't gone, not yet. And as the river cracked and whispered beside them, she looked toward the horizon and whispered, We'll make it, Cole, I swear it. The wind shifted then, gentler, almost warm, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a crow took flight, black wings cutting through the morning light like a promise. By the time the thaw began, the river ran red with clay and snowmelt. Weeks had passed since the fight in Hollow Creek, and Cole Tanner still carried the price of that reckoning under his ribs. The wound had closed, but the ache stayed, deep, pulsing, a reminder that death had ridden close and turned back only for her voice. Mary kept the fire going through every night. She mended his bandages, warmed broth, spoke to him softly in the dark. Slowly, color returned to his face, and one morning he stood by the door again, the sunrise spilling gold over his shoulder. You shouldn't be on your feet yet, she said. He gave her that crooked half-smile. Ain't no better way to get back to livin' than standin' for it. She wanted to scold him, but her heart lifted. Seeing him upright felt like spring breaking through frost. They rebuilt what they could of the cabin, repaired the roof, stacked fresh logs, planted a small garden near the slope. The snow melted from the hillsides, leaving the earth damp and breathing again. Birds returned to the pines. Mary began to laugh again, softly at first, almost shy about it. Cole would catch the sound and look at her as if he were hearing music for the first time. Sometimes at dusk, they sat together on the porch, coffee cooling in their hands, the wind carrying the scent of pine and wild sage. This place, Mary said one evening, it don't feel cursed anymore. Cole leaned back, his gaze fixed on the horizon. That's 'cause you stayed. She smiled faintly. You did too. He didn't answer right away. I reckon I didn't have anywhere else to go. Maybe now you do, she said. Maybe here's enough. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the world grew still. But peace on the frontier was never built to last. It came the night after the rain, when the sky turned copper, and the smell of smoke didn't belong to the hearth. Mary was in the garden when she saw it first, a thin dark plume rising from the east ridge. "Cole," she called, her voice breaking the calm. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing. The air was still, too still, the birds gone silent. Then came the echo, distant hooves, faint but fast. Cole's jaw tightened. "Get inside." Mary froze. "Is it?" He didn't let her finish. "Inside, Mary, now." She obeyed, heart pounding, as he loaded the rifle and stepped off the porch. Through the trees, shadows moved. Not many, 3, maybe 4, but enough. The last remnants of Elias Cain's men come to collect on a dead man's promise. Cole fired first. The echo cracked through the valley like thunder. One rider fell. Another returned fire, the bullet ripping through the cabin wall, splintering wood near Mary's shoulder. She ducked, grabbing the pistol from the shelf. Her hands shook, but her aim was steady. Outside, Cole reloaded fast, ducked behind the wagon. Bullets tore through the night, sparks flying from the metal plow near the barn. "Cole," she shouted. He turned just in time to see one rider break from the trees, a torch in his hand. The man hurled it at the cabin. Flame caught on the dry boards, licking upward in an instant. Mary screamed. Cole's blood ran cold. No. He fired, dropping the man, but it was too late. The fire climbed fast, hungry, merciless. He ran for the porch. Heat hit him hard, blinding, alive. Inside, Mary was coughing, waving smoke from her face as she tried to grab the few things they owned. A Bible, a photograph, the blanket they'd shared through the storm. "Leave it," Cole shouted, dragging her toward the door. "But Mary," his voice cracked, "ain't nothin' in here worth your life." She hesitated, then dropped everything and let him pull her outside. The fire roared behind them, tongues of orange devouring the roof. The last outlaw came charging from the barn, gun raised. Cole turned, fired once more. The man fell, and the world went still except for the hiss and roar of the burning cabin. They stood there, breathless, the glow of the flames painting their faces gold and red. Mary pressed her face into his chest, trembling. "Our home." He held her tight, his voice low. "Homes can be built again." She shook her head, eyes wet. "It was more than wood. It was, I know." He said softly, "I know." The fire reached the roof, sparks flying into the night sky. The cabin groaned, timbers splitting, collapsing into a sea of heat and light. They watched in silence as everything they had made, every board they'd hammered, every night they'd shared, turned to ash. When the roof finally fell, Cole exhaled, slow and hollow. "It's done." Mary wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "What do we do now?" He looked toward the dark horizon, where the first hint of dawn touched the clouds. "We start over." By morning, only smoke remained. The air smelled of pine and sorrow. Ash coated the snow like gray rain. Mary knelt beside the ruins, fingers tracing the scorched earth. In the ashes, she found the small iron key Cole had made for the door, bent, blackened, but still whole. She closed it in her hand. When she turned, he was waiting by the horses, his coat still singed from the fire. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded once, "As I'll ever be." He reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Then let's ride." Together they mounted, turning west into the morning sun. Behind them, the smoke rose like a prayer. The cabin was gone, but the ghosts were gone with it, and somewhere beyond the ridge, new land waited, quiet, unburned, and wide enough for forgiveness. That night, when they made camp beneath a canopy of stars, Mary looked back toward the faint line of smoke still rising in the distance. "Fire took the old life," she said softly. "Maybe it had to." Cole's gaze followed hers, the firelight flickering across his tired face. "Sometimes the only way to make peace with the past is to burn it." She turned toward him, eyes glimmering. "Then let it burn." And under that vast western sky, they sat together in the silence after ruin, two souls unburdened, watching the last embers of their former lives fade into night. The dawn came quiet, too quiet. No wind, no bird song, just the sound of a single breath that didn't come easy. Cole Tanner stirred against the cold ground, the fire beside him nothing but a red glow in the ashes. His skin was pale, lips dry, breath ragged. The wound under his ribs had reopened during the night. The ride, the fight, the fire, it had all been too much for a body that had already met death once and turned it away. Mary woke to the sound of him struggling. She was at his side in an instant. Cole, her voice cracked. He opened his eyes, faint blue, fading like the last light before dusk. Morning, he murmured, trying to smile. You shouldn't be talkin', she whispered, pressing her hand to his chest. You're bleeding again. He gave a soft laugh that turned into a cough. Always figured I'd go out under open sky, not in some bed. Tears welled in her eyes. Don't you say that. Not now. Not after all we've come through. Cole reached for her hand, his fingers trembling but still rough and warm. Mary, it don't matter how long a man lives. What matters is who he finds before he dies. She shook her head, clutching his hand tight. You found me, and I found you. That means you ain't dying. He smiled faintly, his gaze softening on her face. You always did have a stubborn way of believe in what your heart tells you. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her tears soaking into his coat. Please, Cole, don't leave me, not like this. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling her breath against him, the faint tremor of her sobs. The scent of her hair, the wildflower and smoke, was the last thing he wanted to remember if this was the end. The sun climbed slow, painting gold over the hills. Mary tore strips from her shawl, cleaned his wound, tried to stop the bleeding. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady as she whispered to him. Stories, prayers, anything to keep him tied to the world. Remember that day by the creek, she said softly. When you said the water sounded like forgiveness, he managed a faint smile. I remember, you said it sounded like home. Her voice broke. Then stay with me, Cole. We haven't even built it yet. He looked past her, to the line of trees swaying in the wind. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll build it where the earth is soft and the sky don't feel so heavy. Her grip tightened. Not without you. His eyes met hers, clear and deep as the river they'd crossed. You already know how. You just don't believe it yet. By midday, the fever took him again. He drifted in and out, sometimes mumbling names she didn't know, places he'd left behind. Mary stayed by him through every hour, wetting his lips, praying to a God she hadn't spoken to since her husband's grave went cold. At one point, his eyes fluttered open and fixed on her. You're crying, he whispered. I'm fightin', she said. He gave a soft, broken smile. Then I reckon I can rest easy. His hand fell weakly to his side, his breath shallowed. No, she said sharply, shaking him. Don't you dare. You hear me, Cole Tanner. Don't you dare leave me alone again. The wind stirred through the grass, soft like a whisper, and then silence. Mary froze, her hand over his heart. Nothing. Her breath came short, broken. She leaned down, her tears falling against his cheek. Please, she whispered. Please don't go. The world around her blurred. The horizon melted into light. She pressed her lips to his forehead, trembling. You can't be gone. For a long time, there was nothing. No sound but the breeze and the quiet creak of the fire dying out. Then, so faint she thought she imagined it, came a single, shallow breath. She lifted her head. His chest rose once, barely. Cole. His eyes opened, clouded but alive. Still here, darlin', he rasped. Ain't gone yet. Her tears broke into a laugh, half joy, half disbelief. Don't you ever do that again. He tried to smile, though his strength was fading. You keep pulling me back. Maybe heaven's getting jealous. She pressed her hand to his cheek. Heaven can wait. As night fell, she built a small fire again. The stars stretched endless above them, brighter than they'd ever been. Cole drifted in and out of sleep, his head resting against her lap. Mary looked down at him, her heart torn between fear and peace. The firelight danced across his face, rough, scarred, beautiful in its ruin. "You saved me," she whispered. He stirred. "No, Mary, you saved me first." She smiled through her tears, brushing the hair from his brow. "Then I guess we're even." He didn't answer, but his fingers found hers, holding tight. And as the night deepened, with the stars burning like candles above them, Mary leaned close and whispered a promise against his ear. "I won't let the dark take you. Not tonight. Not ever." The prairie stayed silent, listening. The fire cracked softly, sending sparks up toward the sky. And there, between life and heaven, two souls lay bound, not by blood, nor by law, but by something stronger than both. The kind of love that lives even when the heart forgets how to beat. The storm broke at dawn. Cold rain swept the prairie, washing soot and blood into the earth until the world smelled of ash and rebirth. The cabin was gone, nothing left but a skeleton of charred beams and the quiet echo of what they'd once called safety. Mary sat beside Cole beneath the overhang of a fallen pine, her shawl soaked, her hair heavy with rain. He slept shallow, his breath thin but steady. Every rise of his chest was a mercy. Every silence between was a threat. She pressed her hand against his heart again, just to feel it. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, just a little longer." By mid-morning, the rumble of hooves broke through the mist. 4 riders, long coats, badges glinting under the pale light. The marshal's men. Mary's blood ran cold. She knew they'd come. Someone must have seen the smoke, heard the gunfire. Cole Tanner's name was still worth a bounty, even if the man himself was barely breathing. The lead rider, a tall figure in a gray duster, called out, "Anyone alive out there?" Mary rose slowly, mud streaking her skirt. "Here," she said. The marshal dismounted, squinting through the drizzle. "You alone, ma'am?" She shook her head and stepped aside. "My husband's hurt." The marshal's gaze shifted to the figure lying against the log. He frowned. "That's Cole Tanner." Her heart clenched. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "No, sir, that's Cole Cartwright, my husband." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain dripping from the trees. The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Funny. Looks a lot like the man wanted for the Barton gang raid." Mary didn't blink. "Then maybe you're mistaken. The man you're looking for's dead. My husband fought those outlaws to save me. He was shot doing it." The marshal studied her a moment longer, his jaw tightened. "You sure about that, ma'am?" She nodded once. "As sure as I am that I buried a good man out there on that ridge last winter." The marshal's gaze softened. Not quite belief, not quite doubt. Just a man weary of chasing ghosts. He sighed and tipped his hat. "We'll ride into town. Let the doc know you're out here. If he's still breathin', he'll need more than your hands." Mary gave a small nod. "Thank you, Marshal." He mounted again, motioning to his men. "You take care now, Mrs. Cartwright." When they were gone, the silence fell hard. Mary dropped to her knees beside Cole, her body shaking with relief. He stirred faintly, his voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Cartwright, huh?" She laughed through tears. "You hush, you're lucky I didn't tell him you were a ghost." He smiled weakly. "Why'd you do it?" Her breath trembled. "Because I'd rather the world see you as my husband than hang you as a killer." He looked at her for a long time, his eyes glassy but full of light. "You'd lie to save a man like me." She brushed the wet hair from his forehead. "No, I'd tell the truth about who you've become." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet grass and smoke. By nightfall, she had him wrapped in blankets and resting by a small fire she'd built from dry bark. The rain had eased to a fine mist. He watched her move around the camp, tending, fixing, always stubbornly alive. "You could have left me," he said quietly. She stopped, turning to him. "I did, once. Didn't much care for it." He gave a faint smile, eyes closing. "You're something else, Mary Cartwright." She sat beside him, brushing his fingers with hers. "You can call me Mary Tanner if you like. After all, I told the law you're my husband." He laughed weakly, a sound that broke and softened all at once. "Reckon I'll hold you to that. Then you best live long enough to make it true." The night deepened, the rain stopped, the stars returned, distant and endless. Mary lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing. She thought of all that had been lost: the cabin, the farm, the lives torn apart by men with guns and guilt. But she also thought of what remained: the quiet pulse under her hand, the whisper of wind through the pines, the warmth of his body beside hers. When he stirred, she turned to him. His eyes were open, watching her in the dim light. "Mary," he whispered, "you don't owe me nothing. You could go, start again, find peace." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I already have." He frowned slightly. "This ain't peace. This is runnin'." She reached out and touched his face. "No, Cole, this is choosing." He stared at her for a long time, searching for the lie and finding none. By morning, the sky cleared, soft blue over the blackened ruins. A meadowlark sang from a nearby branch. Mary stood over the remains of the cabin, her hands folded. "Guess it's time to move on," she said quietly. Cole leaned against his horse, pale but standing. "Where to?" She looked west, where the land rolled open and the river caught the sunlight like a road made of glass. "Where no one knows our names," she said. "Where the land's still wild enough to forget what came before." He nodded slowly. "West, then." She took his hand, guiding him toward the trail. "West," she repeated, her voice soft but sure. "Where the world can start again." And as they walked beneath the clearing sky, her heart carried one truth she'd never speak aloud: that love born of ruin can be the truest kind, because it knows what it cost to live. The prairie stretched endless before them, golden, wind-touched, and silent as forgiveness. Days had passed since the smoke settled behind them, and though the memory of what burned still lived in their bones, the road ahead felt clean, unmarked. Mary rode beside Cole, her posture steady, her eyes tracing the far horizon. The mare beneath her moved easy, like she knew this trail had been waiting all along. Cole's horse limped a little from the fight, but the man himself had found a strange strength again, as if each mile took a piece of his old sins and left them in the dust. They didn't speak much that morning. Words felt too small for what they'd endured. The sound of hooves, the whisper of grass, the creak of saddle leather, that was their language now. When the sun climbed high, Cole glanced at her. "You sure you want to keep goin' west?" She nodded. "Ain't nothin' left behind us but graves." He looked down at his reins. "And ghosts." Mary smiled faintly. "Ghosts don't scare me anymore. Not when I've already forgiven one." Cole's throat tightened. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her. Ely looked. The woman who'd once trembled behind a shotgun now rode like she'd been born to the saddle. The grief in her eyes had become something else entirely. Quiet strength, the kind that could outlast a storm. By afternoon, the land began to change. Pines thinned, giving way to broad valleys and wildflower meadows. The scent of sage and sun, warmed earth drifted on the wind. Cole felt it deep in his chest, freedom, and something that felt like peace. They made camp by a slow river that wound through the tall grass. The water glimmered with sunset light, soft and gold. Cole knelt by the bank, rinsing the bloodstains from his old bandana. The scars on his hands caught the light like pale ropes. Mary came to stand beside him. "You ever think about going back?" He shook his head. "Ain't nothin' back there worth fassin' again." "You could clear your name," she said quietly. He looked up at her, the corners of his eyes soft with weariness. "Some names ain't meant to be cleared, Mary. Some just fade." She crouched beside him, dipping her fingers into the cold water. "Then let it fade, but don't you fade with it." He smiled at that, a small, broken thing, but real. They watched the river a while in silence. It moved slow and patient, like time itself had stopped rushing. That night, the stars came out brighter than they'd seen in months. The fire crackled low. Cole sat on a fallen log, carving the edge of a branch into something that looked halfway between a whistle and a cross. Mary leaned against her saddle, her blanket drawn up to her shoulders. "What are you mackin'?" He shrugged. "Don't rightly know. Guess my hands just needed something to do." She smiled faintly. "They ain't made for killin' anymore." He looked down at the knife, then set it aside. "No, not anymore." He leaned back, his eyes catching the firelight. "You ever think about what comes next, after we stop runnin'?" Mary looked at him across the flames. "Maybe we stop runnin' when we stop feelin' hunted." He nodded slowly. "Might take a while." She smiled softly. "I've got time." By morning the world was washed clean again, mist curling off the river, birds stirring in the reeds. Cole woke before her, saddled the horses, and stood watching the sunrise. When Mary stepped from her blanket, she found him quiet, eyes distant. "You're thinkin' hard again," she said. "Just wonderin' if a man like me can ever be good enough for a woman like you." She crossed to him, stopping close enough to touch his arm. "Maybe it ain't about being good enough. Maybe it's about being better than you were yesterday." He met her eyes, the first warmth of morning catching in his gaze. "You sure got a way of mackin' the world sound simpler." "Maybe it is," she said, smiling. "We just make it harder when we look back." He nodded, then swung up into his saddle. "Then let's not look back anymore." They rode west through fields of tall wheat and open sky. At times the land seemed endless, just wind, sun, and the sound of their horses breathing. By midday, they passed an abandoned homestead, nothing left but a sagging fence and a half-broken wheelbarrow. Mary slowed, watching it. "That could have been us," she murmured. Cole followed her gaze, maybe once. She turned toward him. "Not anymore." The words hit him harder than a gunshot ever could. He smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "Then I reckon we keep ridin' till the world feels new." When the sun dipped low, they crested a ridge that opened to a valley below, a stretch of river glinting in gold, cottonwoods lining its banks, deer grazing in the distance. Mary stopped her horse, breath catching. "It's beautiful." Cole watched her. "Not the valley. It is." She looked at him and saw something in his face she hadn't before. Peace. For the first time since she'd met him, his eyes weren't haunted. "We could stop here," she said softly. "Build something small, just ours." He took a slow breath, scanning the open land. "Guess a man could do worse than end up here." She smiled. "You ain't in, Cole. You're startin'." He chuckled low. "You keep talkin' like that, you'll make me believe it." "Then I'll keep talkin'." As twilight gathered, they led their horses down to the river. The water caught the last of the sun, turning everything to copper and flame. Cole stood beside her, the wind brushing his hair, the scars on his jaw softening in the glow. He reached for her hand, rough fingers curling gently around hers. "Mary." She turned to him. "Yeah." He hesitated, the weight of a lifetime sitting behind the words. "You saved a man no one else would have looked twice at." She smiled through a quiet tear. "You gave me a reason to live again." He looked at her a long time, then nodded toward the horizon. "Then let's live." And as the first stars rose, they stepped into the river together, boots and all, letting the cold water wash away the last of the blood and dust. When they came out the other side, the air felt different, new, raw, alive. That night they built their fire high, not to hide, but to be seen by the stars. Cole took her hand again, thumb brushing her knuckles, voice low. "Guess the trail ends when we stop runnin'." Mary looked at the fire, then up at him. "No, the trail ends when we start buildin'." He smiled softly. "Then I reckon we start tomorrow." She leaned into his shoulder, eyes on the horizon. "Tomorrow sounds good." The fire burned slow, steady, and bright, just like the love that had learned to forgive itself. By the time spring reached the valley, the river had softened to a song. The land no longer looked wounded. Green had taken hold where ash once lay, and the air smelled of pine and thawing earth. It was the kind of quiet that could make a soul believe in mercy again. Cole and Mary stood at the edge of the water, the same place they'd stopped weeks ago when they first called this land good enough. Now it was theirs. A small cabin rose where the slope met the trees. Rough, hewn logs, stone chimney, and a porch wide enough for 2 chairs and a quiet sunset. The roof still needed patching, and the door leaned a little crooked, but to them, it was a palace built out of second chances. Cole set down his hammer, rubbing a calloused hand across his jaw. "Ain't perfect," he said. Mary looked up from the garden bed she'd been tilling. "Neither are we." He smiled faintly, his eyes soft. "Guess that makes it just right." The wind carried her laugh across the meadow, a sound so light it didn't seem to belong to the same woman who once wept by a grave on a cold ridge. By noon, the air grew warm. Cole fixed the shutter hinge while Mary baked her first loaf of bread inside the half-finished cabin. The smell drifted through the doorway, yeast, smoke, and the faint sweetness of something new. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her move in the lamplight. Her sleeves were rolled up, cheeks flushed from the heat, hair falling loose around her neck. She wasn't the widow who'd met him with a shotgun anymore. She wasn't even the same woman who'd begged him not to die in the snow. She was alive, fully, fiercely, and he loved her for it. Mary caught him watching. "You gonna stand there starrin', or you fixin' to eat?" He grinned, stepping inside. "Depends which one you're offerin' first." She shook her head, smiling. "You're impossible." "Reckon I'm just grateful," he said softly. That evening they sat on the porch steps with plates balanced on their knees, the sky blushing with sunset. The bread was a little burned on one edge, but neither of them cared. Cole tore a piece, handed it to her. "You think this'll last?" Mary looked out over the valley, where the river wound like silver through the grass. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think it's worth trying." He nodded slowly. "Never thought I'd see a day where I wasn't looking over my shoulder." "You still could," she said, "but you don't have to." He turned to her, voice quiet. "You make it sound so easy." She smiled faintly. "It ain't easy, it's just right." When night fell, the stars came out in swarms. The cabin's fire glowed through the window, soft and golden. Cole sat with his rifle across his lap, not out of fear, just habit. Mary came up behind him, laying a hand on his shoulder. "You can put it down now." He looked up at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "It's time." He hesitated a long moment, then stood and carried the rifle to the old stump near the fence line. He leaned it there, upright against the moonlight. Mary watched him in silence. When he turned back, she could see something change in him, a letting go, quiet and complete. He walked toward her slowly, every step measured, as if he was relearning how to live without the weight of steel in his hand. When he reached her, he brushed her cheek with his thumb. "You were right," he said softly. "The trail don't end when you stop running. It ends when you stop hidden." She smiled, eyes glistening. "Then I reckon we're home." Days turned to weeks, the cabin filled with laughter, small chores, and the kind of silence that no longer felt heavy. Mary planted a row of corn near the fence, a few wildflowers by the steps. Cole mended tools, split wood, and read her the worn scraps of letters he'd kept tucked inside his coat pocket, words he once meant to burn. Sometimes they rode to the ridge at sunset. From there, the whole valley stretched beneath them like a promise. The old world, the graves, the storms, the gunfire, felt a lifetime away. One evening, as the light turned to gold, Mary reached for his hand. "You ever wonder why we got another chance?" Cole thought a long moment before answering. "Maybe because we finally stopped running from what hurt us." She leaned her head against his shoulder and started building what could heal us. He kissed the top of her hair, his voice low. "You sure got a preacher's heart for a woman who don't trust sermons." She smiled. "Don't need sermons when you got the truth." By midsummer, the valley came alive. Wild horses ran along the riverbanks, and the nights hummed with crickets. The cabin no longer looked lonely. Smoke curled from its chimney, and a lantern hung on the porch each dusk like a beacon for wandering souls. Cole often sat out there after dark, boots propped on the railing, hat low over his eyes. Mary would join him with 2 cups of coffee, the steam catching in the moonlight. One night, he broke the quiet. "You ever think about the past?" She sipped her coffee. "Not much. You." He stared out at the river. "Only when I need reminding of what not to lose again." She looked at him, the firelight flickering across his face. "And what's that?" He turned, meeting her eyes. "You." Her breath caught. She smiled, slow and soft, the kind that came from deep peace. "Then you ain't never gonna lose me." He reached for her hand, squeezing it once. "Don't stop believin' that." When the dawn came, it painted the world in gold and quiet glory. The horizon shimmered like a promise fulfilled. Cole stood outside the cabin, his arm around Mary's shoulders, the smell of coffee and river mist between them. For a long time, they didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been lived. Finally, he turned to her, eyes gentle as the rising sun. "You're safe now," he said, "inside my cabin." Mary smiled through the tears she didn't bother to hide. "No, Cole, we're safe now, inside our home." The wind carried her words across the meadow, past the river, and into the open sky, where every storm they'd survived was just a memory, and every dawn ahead belonged to them.